Welcome to Between Two Psychs, a podcast where two psychologists and board-approved supervisors deep dive into many of the questions and challenges that provisional psychologists and early career therapists face in everyday practice, during training, throughout the internship, and beyond as they progress into working more independently. Your hosts, Isabelle Tombleson and Claire Trevitt, talk about a range of topics specifically relating to psychologists and therapists who are just starting out. So we're back again, and I'm back with repeat guest, Jo Canine, and we are going to continue our discussion on dissociative disorders. Today we're going to talk about screening and assessing for dissociative disorders. But for anyone who's listening to Jo for the first time, I might pass over and just get you to do a quick introduction so that people know who you are and what you do.
Thank you. So, Jo, I have guided healing psychology. That's my private practice here in Brisbane. I'm generally registered and a board-approved supervisor. I work primarily with people with dissociative identities like DID, complex trauma, and about half of those people I work with are survivors of cults or high-demand groups. I'm very pleased to be here.
We're very, very pleased to have you here. Thank you. Jo is an absolute wealth of knowledge on the area of dissociation, which I think for some people can feel like a very big, complex and scary topic. And Jo, in the first episode, really broke that down and really tried to encourage all of us to develop our knowledge in this area, both for our own understanding, but also in providing really good client care. So today we're going to talk about assessing and screening for dissociation so that we can have a clearer understanding of the level of dissociation the client may be presenting with right at the beginning of treatment, so we know what we're working with and we can provide the right type of treatment.
Yeah. For me, I think of it as in this idea of us getting trained as psychologists to incorporate a DAS or a K10 into all of our intakes to really kind of get a picture of depression, anxiety, stress, and distress. And then the thought for me is because dissociation is a human experience, so every patient we're going to see will dissociate, but not every patient we're going to see has depression. Why not incorporate a screener, say, for dissociation into our intake assessments to identify if the client is aware and knowledgeable of dissociation, their level. So kind of just incorporating that from the get-go. So it's part of the conversation, but also part of just in our heads to conceptualize how much is this person dissociating if it's beyond the typical. How much is this person distressed, like with the K10? So just capturing what is this person's human experience using screeners for dissociation in that.
Wow, so the idea of just bringing that in right from the beginning for all of our clients.
I think so. I mean, there's caveats to it and, barriers to it that I think would be helpful to understand as well. But in the same way with, again, we're screening and trying to understand before even meeting a person the depression, anxiety, stress. Why aren't we also incorporating dissociation within that to capture and really formulate who we're working with and what we're working with before moving into treatment? For me, it just makes sense because it is a human experience to better understand that part of the human experience before moving into the treatment phase as we're going through intake.
Yeah, I can see that would definitely make sense, particularly if you are working in trauma as well, where dissociation seems to be quite prevalent.
Yeah. So, like for me, if there's a client who is referred and they've got depression, anxiety, which, no shade at GPs, is on every referral, I don't know if this person's experienced trauma. I don't know what this person's, history is. Let's just incorporate it and see. Versus if we, you're being referred specifically for trauma, then that to me would be a given. But understanding as well if we're giving it to the client before they come see us, then there's a caveat to the outcome of these screeners. So say the DES, like the DES, the Dissociative Experience Scale, which is freely available. So download that and add it to your toolkit. It's a self-report screener. So with all self-reports, it requires the client to have an understanding of what is being asked of them to report an accurate answer. So a practical tip here is if we're screening for dissociation or any kind of self-report, I want to make sure my client understands what's being asked, because they could answer a 2 or 20%. That happens to me. So if the statement, is sometimes some people are in a car, like riding in a car or a bus, and forget a part or whole of the trip. If they say 2 out of 10, okay, are they understanding what I'm asking? Are they aware that they're dissociating? Because, fun part with dissociation, I could be dissociating and then be kind of entering a dissociative state and exiting the dissociative state and aware of that, or I could be unaware, so I don't even know I'm dissociating. So I can't report I'm dissociating if I don't know I'm dissociating. So I'm going to say the word dissociating so many times. So if the client is not aware, then they're going to underreport. So it's kind of, for me, the practical tip with this is, yes, it would be super lovely if all our clients understood what dissociation is and we give it to them before they come in. But what I like to do and what I often, teach is use it as a semi-structured interview. One, you're building rapport with the client just through that. You're asking them, riding in a car and they say 2, oh, tell me about when that last happened. And that might end up in a narrative and you get so much more data. And so we're adding so much information about this person's experience with dissociation, because again, human experience, everyone will have a level of dissociation. And now I've got narrative, I've got examples. And if they're describing it to me and I understand what dissociation is, I go, oh, this sounds more like a 7 out of 10 than a 2 out of 10. I go, oh, really? Psychoed? Oh, yeah. Well, with that information, yeah, it's more like a 9. And that's vastly different to the 2 out of 10 that we might have gotten without the interview.
Yeah, because I'm guessing some of these questions, we're asking the client for a number. Yeah, it's a number at between 1 and 10, or
a number out of it's either 0 to 100 in terms of percentage it happens to you, or 0 out of 10, but that kind of like Likert scale, I think it's called. And that's really challenging for a lot of people, especially our neurodiverse clients, even though DID is neurodivergence, but say our autistic clients who might be quite literal in their interpretation and go, oh, I don't ride in cars, so it's a 0. Go, yep, okay. How else can I get an answer? But if I just hand it to the client, they're going to say 0, and I'm going to assume it's a 0 because that's a true answer versus it's a literal interpretation. So I always prompt for do it in session with them, because what we also get is observational data. So stuff like DID is covert. That's just the nature of the condition. So if someone's underreporting because the condition is meant to be covert, the answer might come out as you don't have DID or unlikely when they actually do. But if I'm asking them and I'm witnessing dissociation and they're giving me a 2, I go, okay. And then based on rapport, we might challenge and go, I'm wondering, however, is it a 2 or is it actually something else? Or I might note down a 2 and then I have my own data of highly dissociation for this particular question. Maybe I know now that's particularly triggering. So there's a lot of data lost when we screen and assess for dissociation when the client isn't there and we can't control for those variables.
Yeah, I'm guessing, I mean, sometimes with these questionnaires, you'll get you'll get a range of different responses. Like you say, sometimes you'll get that very literal response and that's it. And because the client seems so confident, we might take that as them being confident and have that. But then you'll get other clients who will say, well, it depends on the situation, and sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that, and oh, what do you mean by that? And it can give us so much more information. And even sometimes the complexity I found sometimes when asking these questions that clients really struggle to give an answer is also giving us a lot of useful information in itself.
Very much so. They're witnessing their thought process and getting the data of that, witnessing the rapport of have they pulled back? This question is maybe a bit confronting for them. And so there's so much that can be done. And again, normalizing dissociation's normal. And if it is part of just your repertoire or, routine, then it will feel normal. And so that confidence of this is a normal thing that people do because I do it with every client, and then we'll get that kind of congruency of it is normal. I assess all my clients, so it doesn't feel targeted of, well, I see you're dissociating a lot. It just becomes normal in our practice, and so then we feel more confident to then say it's a normal experience. I do it with everybody.
And you sounds like you really weave that into the initial session. So you're using that to get information, but you're also, it's not like I'm going to ask you all of these questions and I want your responses and I'm just going to note them down and move on to the next question. It feels as though there's lots of space for exploration within those questions because the answers themselves are going to provide you with some really useful information, not only in relation to the responses and the level of dissociation that they may be reporting, but also other historical factors that may be really helpful.
So some clients will report, we'll get through the DES, which is 28 questions within one 60-minute session. Other clients, it might take several. So I'm doing one at the moment and we're 3 or 4 sessions deep and we're only halfway through because it's such a complex concept for this person to understand, or someone who's quite literal. And if the answer is, well, it depends. If it is riding in a car, then it would be a 7 out of 10. But the question also asks about a bus. Well, then it's a 2 out of 10. That might give me information of why is there a difference? Is there a potential trauma in mode of transport? Is there driving in a car I'm in control versus a bus? And so I get so much data about a person with a 28-worded questionnaire and the ability to rapport build within that, questioning of adding humor to it and, oh my gosh, me too, obviously disclose within reason, but yeah, because everybody dissociates, it's a normal experience, or that's really interesting, tell me more. And you might only ask one question for an entire session, and then at the end have so many notes because there's so much more narrative that flows into it. Or you could have clients who are very standoffish and I'm not sure. One, I don't know. And that in itself is a lot of data about how they're responding to you. So you get quite a lot in asking about dissociation when everybody does it versus, oh, you hallucinate. Not everybody does that. That would make sense why there's going to be, ooh, or a lot. But when it comes to dissociation, if everybody dissociates, why am I getting this reaction or that reaction?
And so it sounds like it's a process you really take your time with as well. So I think often we think, okay, well, we've got this to get through and this to get through and 3 or 4 screeners we want to get through. But I think what you're saying here is when we do suspect there is dissociation, I mean, to a point that we're trying to differentiate between whether it's a dissociative disorder, for example, or something else, and to make sure that we're getting the right treatment plan put in place for the client, it is something that we can really take our time with and not feel that we've got to rush through. So if we're spending 3 or 4 sessions getting through these 28 questions, that doesn't mean that we're slow. or that the client's resistant or difficult, it means that it's taking that amount of time to get that information, but it's actually probably worth the investment.
Yes, for the say the DES, which doesn't capture everything because it is a screener. If we're assessing and screening for maybe there's a dissociative disorder, so the latter end of more pathological dissociation or even multiplicity, that treatment is going to be maybe a decade. Do I
Yeah.
really need to get this number final total out in 2 sessions when it might take 10 years for proper treatment? If the person's privileged enough to afford that, no. So you are afforded time overall to really capture the closest to truth possible that any of us can get to. And if the person only has, say, the 10 Medicare, there could be this element of urgency of, I've only got 10 sessions this year, so I need to get the screener out of the way. But if we're doing that, then all the other part of the assessment, I say assessment because the DES is just the questions, the observational data, the rapport building, the narrative, the potential for differential that we get within the narrative, all of that is within using the DES in session that we're getting. So it's not about the DES, boop, and it's like, I got to get these 28 questions. Wow, what a thorough assessment as a clinician using the DES and what we get there as part of a tool to gain all this other information is quite devious at times. It's like, ha ha ha, I have so much more information. But at the end of it, say if it takes 4 sessions, I don't just have an outcome of 35, I have all of this other information that might have seemed chop and changey in another way, but there is such flow and there's beauty in that because then it feels more conversational and it just kind of flows into, oh my gosh, I have so much information now, and my formulation might be more thorough than DES in one go, block in this, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to explain it too, because there is this sense of feeling under pressure, if you like, with the Medicare 10 sessions. We've got to achieve a very clear session plan in each session, and it can put us under a lot of pressure. And I think that if you do rush, then the clients, they're going to feel rushed and they're not going to get the benefit. But what you're describing here, it's lovely because it feels like there's a real rapport building that's occurring. You're really reflecting, you're responding, and you're helping the client understand themselves. So the psychoeducation and the rapport building is really woven into that. It's not like this is just an assessment to get answers and a score. It's about really setting the scene for therapy and building up a really strong connection with that client, but also a strong understanding of that client and some psychoeducation woven in. So as you say, it's a little bit sneaky in some ways because it fulfills a number of different functions
Yes.
without necessarily defining it in that way. So I just love the way that you've really unpacked that and explained that, because I think otherwise it could seem like, okay, this is what we're going to do and it's going to take this amount of time. We don't want anything to feel like a waste. We want everything to feel valuable.
Yes. And if we believe, we're thinking maybe this client has more, fragmented sense of consciousness or, more multiplicity, I think is 8 or maybe even 10 years that a person who has dissociative identities goes before a correct diagnosis. And I just wonder to myself, is that because there's that urgency to get to a diagnosis? And by that urgency, we actually miss out on the extra info that gets us there kind of quicker. It's like slow but quick at the same time. And then again, if, at the end of it, the person's done, your 10 Medicare sessions and 4 is just the DES, and then you got 6 and that's the end, unfortunately, their experience with you as a therapist is engaging and caring. And so they might then, you have to wait a while if you're doing, say, monthly even, a little bit until the next year, but they're going to really have a really positive experience with therapy in general. so that it is so deeply layered, simple, but so deeply layered that usually highly traumatized individuals. So having that positive experience with therapy, having a positive experience with a human being, having a positive experience with slowing things down to really feel understood and seen, that's all therapeutic, all using a 28 question screener that on the outside go, you've only done a DES and you've done 4 sessions, go, I've done so much. And then pass along that education, talk within your peer groups, how important it is and all the different layers that are therapeutic that might not be tangible of we did a DES, we did a intake interview, but you are getting that. It's just more human versus clinical.
Yeah. And if the client comes away after 6 sessions with a clearer understanding of themselves, even if no, and when I say treatment, I think the relationship and building the rapport and providing the psychoeducation is a really important component of treatment. And so these are actually interventions, but before we've even got to maybe, a formalized treatment plan in terms of, okay, well, how are we going to help this person move forward? If someone walks away with a really clear understanding of themselves in a way that they haven't had before, then that's a really, really good outcome. I would see that as a really, really important outcome.
Or at least an understanding of what it isn't. That it isn't, say, borderline. And there's, comorbidities, but if there's so much stigma to these other diagnoses that are differentials and it isn't accurate, I mean, a person can have DID and borderline, but if it is, oh, it's schizophrenia, and they've come to an understanding that it isn't that, there might be some, grief and, adjustment to it, but this person has really taken the time to listen and truly understand and that be part of it. If we're in health, allied health, and we get lumped in with psychiatrists and the medical profession where it is quick, that we miss the seen and heard, and that they will come in with a sense of urgency. I need to know what it is. Go, how about we just slow it down because I want the right answer. I say to clients, I want to do it once and I want to do it well. I could do it fast, but it probably won't be done well. Do we want the answer now and, not be super confident with it? Or are we okay just holding space for a bit more time, which in itself is skills work, helping that client develop the skill to slow things down is therapy, is an intervention. Again, sneaky intervention. And if any of my clients are listening, no, it's not. I'm not doing any of that. But there's so much that can be done in quite a simple and subtle and human way because we're working with people that incorporates the clinical.
Yeah, I just love that. As you say, it's about being thorough. It's not about the quick fix. And I particularly when it comes to trauma, there isn't a quick fix, and normally it is about going slower because that then often does speed up the process. Because there is no fast process, but we don't want to waste time thinking it's something else. So
Yeah.
yeah. I was going to ask in terms of where people can get any kind of training. You said that the DES is available freely online, so I'll put the link to that in.
Yeah. So ISSTD, International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, they have, I think, the DES and then a somatoform questionnaire, which is always helpful, and they're all freely available. Pretty sure the MID, there's the mid 60, which is a shorter version, so 60 questions, and then the long form mid, which is like 220, and that's more diagnostic. I'm pretty sure you can do get that from online, and they offer trainings for that. But again, supervision with someone who uses these measures a lot so that you can get that nuanced that maybe the general training, you get the idea of what each question is asking. And then how do I do that in that more semi-structured interview? Like, what am I actually asking? What answers am I looking for that might be low or underreported, but they're actually like the true answer is more of a 7, but they're saying a 2. How do I work with that? So how do I apply that knowledge in the room?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really about getting the skills to really administer and interpret in the here and now, but also looking at individual presentations in the context of, this is the person's history and supervision, and this is how they answered, and getting that information. So I guess supervision will be really helpful in those early stages of an assessment, particularly if you're just starting to do this.
And being able to debrief, because sometimes we will do screeners and assessments and we just don't know, because a lot of dissociative, trauma disorders are covert in nature from self and from other, that we might ask one of the questions and it might be extremely triggering and we get a reaction in the session and not sure what to do. And so again, supervision, we're screening and assessing for dissociative disorders, which are trauma-based, and if we're at the other end of the spectrum, for me, neurodevelopmental, like DID. So there's a lot there that can be uncovered by doing these, that we want to make sure we're doing them safely, and feel confident this is an okay response. It's a big response, but I'm okay as therapist because, one, that's information. I now know what a big trigger is. I know how to contain that with client or come back to a sense of okayness, maybe not calm. And then that in itself is rapport and an intervention. And there's just, if the client's in front of you, you're always doing therapy. No matter if you're just sitting there in silence, that's therapy. So it's how do we, as early career or professionals, understand that even when maybe I screw up, because I make mistakes and that's part of it, like Joe isn't perfect. How is that rapport building to be human or like psych human? How do I be okay with that and maybe use that as part of my screening and assessment and use that as part of, the rapport building? Because we're two people working together or two bodies if there's multiple people inside.
I think that's also so important, and I love that you've said that because we are all human and we all do make mistakes. I certainly make my fair share of mistakes, and having mechanisms to be able to repair that, and also to repair that with our clients, but also with ourselves, is so important because that's the work as well. We're going to be human in the room. So I'm going to put all of the links to those assessments in the show notes, so that people have access to those. And also I'll repeat, because I'm not sure that we've mentioned on this episode, that Joe is actually a board-approved supervisor. So if you are wanting any specific supervision on any of this, you suspect that you may have a client with a dissociative disorder, or you're just really interested to learn more about this, then she is available for both individual and also for group supervision.
Yeah, small groups. There's also a 3-part webinar series with APS this year, first one in June, around DID. So if you're looking for more like CPD, that's on the APS website as well.
And you're running that training, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Lots of very rich information that I'm sure people are going to take away. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps others find the show. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Between Two Psychs for more updates and resources. For more information and to explore everything we offer, head over to our website, betweentwopsychs.com.au. We appreciate your support and we'll see you next time.